afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Business and Policy Dialogue. My name is Kumar Guru. I'm the Director of External Relations at the Indian School of Business. Today we have with us Hemang Jani, who is the Secretary to the Capacity Building Commission of the Government of India, and Professor Deepa Mani, Deputy Dean, Executive Education and Digital Learning at the Indian School of Business and Professor of Information Systems at the ISB, will be in conversation with Mr. Jani. We're going to be talking about capacity building in the government this afternoon. This is a matter that has, gained a lot of prominence in recent times. The Prime Minister's ambitious Mission Karmi Yogi plan, under which this commission has been newly established to, I think, achieve some very ambitious goals, but very much required sort of, ideas that needs to be executed and implemented in this country. From being rule-based to role-based, from harmonizing and standardizing training initiatives across the country for civil servants, not just for the offices of government services, but also for employees across the board and so on. Also, the Commission's plan is also to sort of bring in some accreditation standards across training institutions across the country, both the central and the state training institutions, and so much more. The Commission is also looking to partner with academic institutions and other research establishments in their endeavor. And we are very delighted today to host Mr. Hemang Jani at our campus here in Hyderabad. With those few words of introduction, I want to sort of throw it open to both of you, and Deepa, over to you right now.
Thank you, Guru. Thank you very much. Hemang, welcome to ISB. It's a pleasure to host you here. Like Guru said, just a few days ago, we were in Delhi, at a panel that was hosted by the Capacity Building Commission. And a lot of our alums who were there had this question, which I thought would be a good opening for this dialogue, which is, if you can tell us what is the Capacity Building Commission about, what is its genesis, and what are the vision and mission of this important organization. I think that will kind of help us kickstart this dialogue in a useful manner.
Thank you very much, Deepa and Guru. Thank you for hosting me at ISB. It is always wonderful to interact with people from ISB. If I can summarize our vision in one sentence, I will not use one sentence, but I will use two questions.
Okay.
My job is to ask every civil servant a question: what did you learn today? And a follow-up question: what did you share today? So, Capacity Building Commission's genesis or tenet is to promote learning for all, promote continuous learning for every civil servant in the country. If you go to a railway station and book a ticket, or if you go and travel in a bus, or if you go to your local municipal corporation, for you, the person who issues a ticket or a person who solves your water problem is the government.
Right.
For you, government is not the secretary or a joint secretary sitting somewhere in the Sachivalaya. So how do we enable them to deliver better civil service, better citizen services? How do we imbibe knowledge, skills, or attitude which can enable them to deliver better services on behalf of the state or on behalf of the government? That is the genesis of Capacity Building Commission. As we talk further, I will tell you more about the structure of the commission and the formal terms of reference that we have with the government.
Okay, thank you very much for that. When you say that, there are two questions that you want to ask civil servants, at least, the commission is designed in that manner, which is to explore what did you learn today. Do you believe that, there's obviously been a lot of talk that the bureaucracy that took us through the last 75 years perhaps cannot take us through the next 75, holding everything else constant. So do you also have a belief on what they should learn and how they should learn, to help, in some sense, create value along all of the lines that you talked about, such as more citizen-centric services, more technology-driven, a bunch of those things. So can you talk a little bit about specific skills, knowledge, capabilities that you think the Commission believes are next order skills that civil servants should imbibe?
Correct. See, we are going to face 21st century challenges. And we can't solve those challenges with the 20th century knowledge or structure or processes. People are going to be constant. And the people we get in our bureaucracy, or even at your school you get, are always going to be the best of the quality. Because the selection process and the process which allows them entry is so hard and so tough. It is the structure and the enabling environment that we create for them, and I would narrow it down to learning environment. The learning environment that we create for them, that makes more of it. For example, for every initiative which we are taking, our North Star are three. One is the citizen centricity. Are our civil servants and are our services citizen centric? Are they enabled to deliver that? Second lens which we are taking very prominently is the technology lens. Emerging technology is going to throw many challenges at the public policy and many solutions as well. Do we have the capability to assess them? Do we have capability to adopt them? That is also another lens which is our North Star. And the third and the most important North Star which pertains to the state capacity is alignment with the national priorities. For example, we all know Swachh Bharat, housing for all, health for all, Kisan Bima are all our national priorities. But are our structures, our processes, our people geared and enabled to deliver those? So those are some of the areas on which Capacity Building Commission is working. In general, capacity building is not a new concept, but any capacity building exercise without the North Star is not useful. And that is why we have narrowed it down to these three lenses.
Sure. And if you could talk a little bit about what is different now. So for instance, if let's say one is setting the objective itself along, the North Star that you outlined, giving structure to capacity building effort and saying here are three principles that will guide us. That seems like, a shift in some ways because it's very structured. But the second, can you also talk about, for instance, what are some of your efforts in each of these areas? So we can understand how this is, how this is different now. So for instance, if citizen centricity must have been a focus earlier, and even if it's emerged as a guiding North Star now, what are some of the efforts of the CBC that will make citizen-centric services more realizable today than it was before?
Excellent question. See, as I mentioned, capacity building or training are not new words for government. We already have a national training policy 2012 in force, which lists the similar structure, similar institutional mechanism. What is new to the Capacity Building Commission is a very well thought and elaborate institutional mechanism where we have the commission as a policy body. I will go back to Mission Karmayogi and the architecture of Mission Karmayogi. So at the top of Mission Karmayogi sits the Prime Minister's Human Resource Council, which will be a large advisory body, which will be the guiding force. Below that is the Cabinet Secretariat's coordination unit, which will help us coordinate with the entire government structures and the departments. Commission's role is to work on the policy aspect of capacity building. And we also have another organization, a special purpose vehicle, which will create an online learning management system, an online platform for government called IGOT, Integrated Government Online Training Platform. And all this put together becomes Mission Karmayogi. So a very structured approach to capacity building and a very goal-oriented approach to capacity building are the two defining factors on which we are working, and that is how we are looking at this differently. Another aspect to capacity building is we are working both on the supply side and demand side equally. For example, on the supply side of capacity building, you have various training institutions. Everybody, all of us know about the famous Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy in Mussoorie. You are sitting in Hyderabad, very close to the police academy, which trains our police service officers. So we are working at, there are 25 such institutions in the country, and there are 33 state level institutions which are called administrative training institutions, which train the state level civil servants. So we are working on upgrading the quality and helping them on various aspects of civil service capacity building. At the same time, we are working at the demand side as well. For example, every department we will help every department create a capacity building plan for next 3 years. We are already working with 7 pilot departments, and we will expand it to all 90 Government of India departments. So we are working on demand side to find the capacity gap. And at the same time, we are working with the supply side with the training institutions to communicate this gap to them and also to enable them to bridge this gap. So this is how we are looking at this architecture. We are also working on a couple of other areas. For example, you are a business school, so you might have heard of the economic survey. Your
Right.
students must be downloading the economic survey to know the health of economy. Similarly, the Commission is writing a report called the Annual State of Civil Services, which will essentially talk about the health of civil services and health of civil service capacity in the country. We are also looking forward to create a platform. For example, we all want to be at Davos every year. Davos is a platform for dialogue on economy, a global platform for dialogue on economy. We are also trying to create a global platform for dialogue on civil service capacity building, public sector reforms related issues, civil service reforms related issues, governance related issues. Many of the countries who have similar civil service structure, we all have a Mandarin type civil service structure. And many of the Commonwealth countries, they have a similar structure. They have done a lot of work on civil service reforms or on capacity building or on training. We are also trying to bring all of them together on a common platform and create a platform to create that. So these are some of the issues on which we are working, and we are very much excited to talk more about that.
Okay. It seems like the CBC is at the center of an ecosystem, right? Where
Correct.
you're working with, in some sense, multiple stakeholders to improve the capacity building effort of human capacity of the country.
Correct.
Right. Can you talk a little bit more about the efforts in each of these areas as they relate to the three objectives: citizen centricity, especially citizen centricity, and technology-enabled execution? So both of those.
Sure. So, as I earlier mentioned, for a common citizen, the lowest level of civil servant is the government. And what that civil servant delivers is what government is delivering. Now, just to put things in context, there are 3 million or 30 lakh civil servants at the central government level. And numbers may vary slightly, but there are around 20 million, so 2 crore civil servants at the all the state governments put together. Now, the top ranks of the civil services are only few thousand. So, bunch of our state capacity or bunch of our civil servants, they lie at the bottom. So, how do we create opportunities for them to learn and deliver better civil services, better services to the citizen? That is the citizen-centric lens we are taking. For example, currently, because a lot of training used to happen in physical format, it was not possible for everyone to take opportunity to get trained or upgrade their skills or upgrade their services. So we are creating an online platform which will enable learning for all at any point in time, 24/7, on the tap of their mobile. So that is something which we are doing. For the citizen-centric lens, more than the skills and knowledge, what becomes important is the attitude, the behavior. Oftentimes, we go to a government office and our problem doesn't get solved, but we get treated so well by the person. It itself gives us a solace that, okay, no problem. I think rules don't permit to solve my problem, but at least I got heard, I got treated well. So how do we create that empathy and how do we create that behavioral competency also in civil servants? That is something which will become important. Similarly, I mentioned about the emerging technology. So, for example, now drones are going to deliver your medical services, drones are going to deliver your agriculture services, health services. How do you enable a civil servant to assess and procure the solutions or assess and create those solutions so that the citizen services becomes better? So those are some of the aspects. For example, for that we'll have to create a lot of regulatory capacity at the top civil servants. But at the same time, we'll also have to create a lot of awareness at the bottom level. I like to coin one phrase that technologies are the new humanities. So far in every school, we have been talking about that everybody should know something about humanities. Now is the time when everybody should know something about technology. Your car is going to be driven a lot by artificial intelligence, right? So your car's driver should know about how artificial intelligence works. Similarly, upper division clerk or a lower division clerk should know about a chatbot solution which is based on AI and how it delivers the services. So these are some of the areas which become important, and we are working very closely with both the public sector and private sector in creating solutions. For example, we are working on creating short courses which are available on your mobile phone through an app, which are very short but we create only awareness about these technologies or some of the solutions that exist in public sector. Singapore has done this really well. Australia has done this really well. They some of their best courses and some of their most downloaded courses are the short ones related to the emerging technologies.
So it brings up several interesting streams of conversation. So the first, let's start with emerging technologies since you talked about it, the new humanities. So when one is, you obviously touched about how you want to increase the adoption of these technologies to deliver better services. You want them to become more familiar with these technologies so that adoption is increased, etc. But there is also this whole space of adoption is contingent on how effectively you regulate the digital economy as well, right? So, there has been many classic economic aphorisms would say that regulation always lags innovation. And so if you have a sharing economy, do you treat the driver exactly the same way as you treat the driver in a taxi? I mean, there are many things that have come to fore in the last few years in the digital economy. Uber is not a car product company, but yet it is a competitor to the car. So you have to include it in the same ambit of competition, which brings about implications for CCI. I mean, a bunch of regulatory bodies. So is there also an effort to in some sense, the policymakers, future policymakers or current policymakers, to also not just talk about emerging technologies from the perspective of their adoption, but also from the perspective of effective regulation so new business models can prosper and also growth, valuable growth can happen.
So see, I'm not qualified to talk on technology policy, but everything boils down to when it comes to emerging technology or when it comes to capacity related to emerging technology, to the knowledge, skill or awareness. Now, from technology perspective, for a civil servant, awareness becomes the first step. If I'm aware of what solutions exist, if I'm aware of where to find a solution, then I have won half the battle. Then comes when assessing for regulation, the knowledge and the skills. So that is where if we have structured courses and if we have structured programs where technology policy related knowledge is imparted to civil servants and it is made available to them at the tap of their click or mobile phone, that becomes important. And see, one interesting aspect to everything, because since we are discussing technology and technology has made everything fast-paced. So one interesting aspect to technology for capacity building is also the technology will enable capacity building as well.
Yeah.
We are going to create a technology platform. One of our team members and our chairman, in fact, likes to give an example from the movie Matrix. If you know the lead actress in the movie Matrix, she jumps into a helicopter chopper and she calls the back office that, hey, which model of chopper is this, and can I learn how to fly it? And she gets the course wired to her immediately in her mind, and she starts flying it within a fraction of a second. So adults learn the most when they need the most. So if I am stuck at some solution, if I am stuck at some problem, I will make an effort to go to YouTube, or I will make an effort to go to an online platform and find a solution or a course related to it and learn. So that is where capacity building for adults become important. If you make it available when it is required, if you make it available at the time and at the place it is required, it becomes, and that can only be done by technology. So we can't have people go to a campus every 1 year or every 2 years and only study. Now, of course, a lot of business and other education is also moving online because of that. So those are some of the interesting challenges and solutions both that technology throws at us.
Sure.
And we are working on it.
Which also brings me to your technology-led platform. You talked about iGod. So can you talk? I mean, like you said, there is the thing that you said, which makes a lot of sense, is that the idea behind this was to scale training and capacity building to the many, the nearly 2 crore civil servants who it's difficult to get in an offline medium and train, in a certain way. So it obviously gives you that kind of scale. But what is your, what's your plan to grow this platform? How is this set up as a marketplace? Obviously, you can't do it alone. You can't have only one content there. So are there going to be several content partnerships, educational institutions, etc., who you would invite on this platform? What's the business model in some ways for this particular platform?
No, interesting question, because so this is not only a training platform. It is actually much more than training plus platform. The idea is to move from rule-based training to role-based training. So the platform's first job is to identify and map all the competencies that a civil servant has and create a competency passbook for a civil servant. And according to that competency passbook, the competency gaps will be identified. For example, if you are teaching at a business school, and if you are teaching, say, XYZ course, are you competent to teach that course? Do you have the latest knowledge? Do you have the skills to teach? Because teaching is also a skill. And do you also have attitude to do that? Now, if I identify the competency gap at all these 3 levels, and then I will get my demand that this is the course that is required. And then on the demand side, there will be a marketplace which creates so many courses. And that is where we have a lot of central training institutions. And more than the CTIs, we have many training institutions, close to around 350 attached to different departments and different ministries, who are constantly doing this work in the physical format. So we are trying to bring all of them and all their knowledge on this online platform and make it available to everyone. And that is the idea behind the special purpose vehicle. Of course, we have a separate task force and separate team of people working on SPV, and they are going much more deeper into all these questions and answers.
Very interesting. So there is a lot of data and technology play in terms of also emerging at the heart of all of the skilling interventions, which also brings me to the other piece, which is impact. So when there are many training institutes and when you use technology to scale, a lot of clutter can come into the platform. So it becomes important to continually, any skilling intervention is as, you can only improve it if it's being measured. So, is there also a framework or a plan to assess impact of all of the training and capacity building that you've been doing? Because that's something even as educators we feel, is lacking in the skilling ecosystem in the country.
Correct. So, see, in business, you have a very old and famous saying, what gets measured gets done. So similarly, if you don't assess the impact, you don't know whether the objectives with which you had set out a capacity building intervention. And it is not just limited to training. We are also trying to promote a lot of non-training capacity building initiatives. So how do we measure the impact of a capacity building intervention? That is one of the questions on which we are working. We are trying various methods and in fact ISP is also helping us on some of them. But that will become an important and integral part of it, and that is where also the technology platform will help enable how to assess the impact of it. So, and there are a lot of non-training areas as well in which, for example, the processes, our government processes and our structures also enabling enough to deliver the services or to enable knowledge, skills and attitude for them. That becomes also very important.
Maybe we should talk about that then. So, what are some of the complementary changes? Skilling is one, but I think sometimes, when you provide training on all the changes that can be potentially made and all of the different things that you can do, but the person is incredibly constrained in effecting that change, then it can actually backfire and have a very demotivating effect. So, can you also talk a little bit about what are some of the complementary changes that need to be affected in addition to skilling, for such change to actually be affected, realized,
Correct.
and drive value?
So see, we are looking at capacity building in a very broad manner. So when it comes to training, you are talking about building capacity of an individual. So that is an individual capacity. We are also looking at organizational level. What is an organizational level initiative? And that is where we are helping each department and ministry, and there are 90 odd departments at the Government of India. We are helping them, or we are facilitating creation of a capacity building plan. So typically when you go to a government department, there is no HR function. You don't find a HR VP or an HR director or executive director there, right? So we are trying to create a capacity building unit at each department, which will create a plan for that department, which will include both training and non-training interventions. And the third and the most important aspect becomes the institutional level. For example, even a simple thing, when you work for a corporate, you have certain mandatory days of training. You have certain mandatory trainings as well. So you have to take them. Otherwise, either your email will stop, or otherwise your something will stop. I used to work at the World Bank, and if we didn't take our cyber security training, our email would stop working next day. So you are motivated to go and take it. So similarly, you have to also have some institutional level mechanism in place so that everybody is enabled and everybody gets opportunity, but also gets motivated to acquire the skills, knowledge, or attitude in trainings.
Sure. Which also brings a key part of this ecosystem is also the citizens themselves. Many times it's been said, right? And a key element of a smart city is an empowered citizen. Correct. Who is able to demand that level of service, right? That's in some sense what makes a city smart. So, are there also efforts for capacity building at the grassroots, or is the hope that these new class of civil bureaucrats would also drive that kind of change at the grassroots?
No, definitely. See, that is where we are working in any capacity building exercise would have three kinds of competencies on which they focus. One is the domain knowledge, the second is the functional knowledge or the functional competencies, and third is the behavioral competencies. So when you talk to a civil servant, when a citizen approaches a civil servant, largely it gets driven by the behavioral competency, because your attitude matters, whether you are a problem solver, whether you are a listener, whether you are a solution finder, that becomes important. Whether you have empathy to gauge the level of problem or to gauge the amount of pain the person is in. So that is where we are focusing a lot on the behavioral competencies at the lower level. And the beauty of behavioral competencies is it is all encompassing. You don't have to customize a lot there. You can do a blanket training, and that makes our job also easier. For example, we are working with Railways Department to work on, say, behavioral competency training for around 100,000 civil servants at the Railways Department. So, large departments which also have many citizen-facing civil servants, that becomes very important. And of course, in say years to come, these efforts will definitely make a difference there, and will also certainly the goal is to result into better citizen services. That is the ultimate North Star with which we are focusing on the mission currently.
So, Hemant, can we talk a little bit about what are the barriers to this transformation? Clearly you all would have some assumptions about what are constraints to change when you design the structure, etc. So can you talk a little bit about what your assumptions were about what would be some constraints to change, resistance to change, barriers to change? What are some of your thoughts on this?
That's a very important question, because we all come with our preconceived notions, and I'm also one of them. And we thought there will be a lot of resistance, but contrary to our notion, we are getting a warm welcome from everywhere. So if we talk to the training institutions, if we talk to the departments, if you talk to the person responsible for training or related efforts. From everywhere, we are getting a very warm welcome, and everybody is re-emphasizing that this is the time. This is the time we should have done this. We should have focused on the human resource related aspects of the government, and that is well. But still, there are some constraints. For example, one of the constraints that we identified earlier, and of course, not only we, but the people who also worked on conceiving the Mission Karma Yogi, is the physical to digital transformation. Because a lot of training, and actually pandemic, it enabled it, in not only in our case, but in many cases. So a lot of training and other areas became online and became available online. So that transition, how smoothly that happens and how soon that happens, will be one of the challenges. But we are working on that, and the teams are also working on that. Second challenge that we face is how do we create an institutional mechanism, because often such efforts and such large efforts, they don't result into an institutionalized memory. So how do we create an institutional mechanism around it? How do we make it the DNA of a particular organization so that the capacity building efforts become natural to that department, and they start upgrading their knowledge, they start upgrading, relooking at it. So, for example, one of the measures that we are taking is, as part of the capacity building plan, we are also creating a unit, a dedicated unit, which will work on this. We are also trying to put those into certain government rules, etc. That okay, there should be certain training before doing certain job. We are trying with lot of such pilots and lot of such examples, and those are two challenges that I see we are facing.
The human resource survey, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, so see, if you work for a large corporate, and many of our friends who are joining online, they work for large corporates, and we often get bugged by our HR department that there is a survey and you have to take it, and you also get hammered every year. Oh, we need a 70% participation from your unit. But those are the only way in which the human resource department can know whether what is your motivation level, what do you like, what do you not like, what are your constraints in your working. So similarly, we are also working on an engagement survey where we go and ask the civil servant himself that what are your motivations, what do you think you should be trained on, what do you think the enabling environment should be like. And it is a very standard methodology in human resource department. It's called an engagement survey, and we are also working on that. So, and we are very much excited. Say in next 6 months or so, we will come out with something which will become our input, which will also become our guide for the future capacity.
And you can likely scale this beyond civil servants as well, because I can imagine that this can be a very valuable audit of sorts, right? A human resource audit of sorts, which can really fuel training. I mean, when we look at a lot of the data that's collected by labor surveys in other
Correct.
parts of the world, there is such deep, rich, high resolution data that's collected, which
Correct.
allows for these point interventions, not just in skilling, but variety of other things. So
we are taking baby steps. So we are starting everything small, and you start small, you excel at it, and then you grow
right.
bigger, and you take the next step. So that is the approach we are taking in everything, whether it is training or whether it is other non-training initiatives or our survey or HR audit, everything. So hopefully we will reach to a state where we can use a set of robust analytics to inform the capacity building and HR related issues in the future.
So if you had to assess the impact of the CBC, like a year from now, if you tell me like here are 2 things, 3 things that if we had achieved, then this would count as a good impact assessment. What would some of those things be? It doesn't have to be quantitative, just qualitative would be fine.
Yes, you are putting me on the spot, but I will
broadly, even if you say more citizen-centric stuff, I mean, what along the lines that you said?
No, I will go back to my opening remark. If I get an answer, and as commission, if we get an answer to our question, that what did you learn today? And if everybody has learned something, then we will feel that we are successful. And also the follow-on question, that what did you share? Because see, one of the tenets on which we are working is removing the de-silo, or removing the silos, or de-siloization. And it's not just government. Any large bureaucracy or any large setup has silos. So how do we promote more sharing, more collaboration? So if I get a positive answer to what did you share today, those two answers will gauge the success for us.
Thank you very much. Hemang's been incredibly, patient and responsive with all our questions. I think the audience has questions for you, Hemang. So I'm going to pause now, and Guru will put forth those questions to you.
Thank you so much, Hemang and Deepa. Thank you very much for this wonderful conversation. I have 3 questions. I'll start with the first one. And you may have partially answered this, Hemang, but also, so one of the questions is, what are some of the initial challenges that you're facing? Especially you spoke about the pilot in 7 departments initially out of the 90 odd departments of the Government of India. The question is, have you faced any initial challenges in the pilot phase of your Commission's efforts at this point of time?
So I think we are facing similar challenges that any pilot faces, to figure out, and that is the idea of a pilot, right? To learn from that and how to identify the challenges and their solutions. So some of the areas which I already mentioned, how do we move from a large number of people from physical to, say, digital training, or even try with the phygital training. Second, how do you even assess the capacity gap? I mentioned about the 3 lenses: the citizen centricity, the technology, and the national priority. So how do you even assess the gap? So there we are also trying with some of those. And also, how do we put the measure that will assess the impact of whatever initiatives are being taken? So those are some of the, I wouldn't call them challenges, but those are some of the areas or opportunities on which we are working in finding solutions to it.
Thank you. So we have Alok who's asking a question. Says, it seems a lot of capacity building initiatives are aimed at anticipating knowledge gaps through competency passbooks and providing just-in-time learning solutions. How does iGOT envision to streamline such customized content creation?
So see, iGOT, the concept behind iGOT is a beautiful concept. It is a demand-driven concept rather than a supply-driven concept. So far, we have been seeing, and it is true for any education institution, a lot of it is always supply-driven. And then when you receive feedback, you make it demand-driven. In case of iGOT, the vision is to make it a continuous demand-driven platform where the person whose passbook identifies gap, it also gets filled by the selection made by that person. What do I want to learn and how do I want to learn? And the second beautiful aspect of iGOT is it will also enable the civil servant define their journey going forward. So if I want to acquire certain knowledge and skills and competencies, I'm free to do that. Right now, there are a lot of challenges, whether I will find this particular course or not, where will I find it, how would I go it. But if it is available on the tab, you can do it easily.
Thank you. There's a question from Krishna who asks, how does CBC plan to factor in the cultural and other diversity in a country like India while standardizing training needs across the country for the various services?
That's a very important question, because it is not only our culture of, the culture of our country, it is also culture of each service, each silo, and that is the tenet for all our work, that how do we promote de-siloization, how do we create a harmonious approach to everything. And I am sure all that is put together in iGOT and will definitely create a harmonious platform for everybody to learn. But one common culture that we want to promote is the culture of learning, because there should be learning for all approach everywhere, and there should be a learning for all at every time, or at every day, at every moment. So continuous learning culture is the common culture at which we are aiming.
Thank you. That's a very positive sort of response to this question. There are two more questions, and I'm going to club them because I think it's somewhat related. One question is about the composition of CBC and the stakeholders involved, and the second question is how can people be part of the Commission's initiatives? So from two different people, but I'm just clubbing them together.
So, Government of India has notified the Commission. There are 3 members of the Commission: Chairman Mr. Adil Zainulbhai, who was earlier also the Chairman of McKinsey in India. He is also Chairman of QCI currently. He is the Chairman of the Commission. We have Dr. R. Balasubramaniam. He teaches at Cornell and he is a grassroots activist, and he also runs an organization called GRAM. He has written 7 books. 3 of them are bestsellers. One of the very popular one is I, the Citizen. We have Mr. Praveen Pardeshi. He himself was a 85 batch Administrative Services Civil Service officer. He was also the Municipal Commissioner of Mumbai before joining this. He has also worked at UN. And so this 3 member put together is the Commission. I am the Secretary of the Commission, or you can call the administrative head of the Commission. And I was at the World Bank immediately before coming to join the Commission. This is the composition, and we have a very young and vibrant team of 15-20 people. And that is where we look for places like ISB to provide us talent and work with us. Currently, we are recruiting in recruiting phase, so we are getting a lot of recruitment, but we are also looking at various internships and fellowships through which people get involved in the Commission's work.
Thank you. I think we'll take this last question from Shilohu Rao, who says, it's a great initiative by the Government of India. Does the Commission plan to extend its capacity building initiatives to PSUs as well as state governments?
So the ambition is there that we will be able to extend it to PSUs and state governments as well. See, our ambition is to work at all 3 levels. I gave a metric of individual, organizational, and institutional level. The another 3x3 matrix becomes working with the federal government or central government, state government, and also the local level government. So our ambition is to ultimately create templates and frameworks which can be used and which can be facilitated for any kind of public sector organization.
Great. So I think we've come to the end of the questions that we have. There's one more question, but it was somewhat similar to this thing about, much of the work happens through the state government. And I think you just answered about your intent on how to work with state governments and PSUs. Deepa, do you want to add anything about some of the work that you're doing with the Commission before we formally conclude?
Sure. So we are working on a few things. I think, one is, of course, being a content partner like all other academic institutions that you provide the opportunity to. The second is, I think, given that we are a research-backed institution and all our content is research-driven, things like impact assessment come naturally to us, and therefore, I guess, we're also involved, like you said, both at the program level more immediately in a few days, as well as at the broader, creating an assessment framework that will allow a bunch of impacts to be measured. We're very keen on collaborating further on that. And there's, of course, knowledge repositories in terms of case material, briefs, etc., that given our rich experience in working with the government as well as the public sector, and on our supply side, our ability to have our faculty work closely to generate cases and other knowledge material is also something that comes naturally to us in our portfolio.
Of course, we are looking forward to partnering with many organizations and tapping into the indigenous talent that we have, both on the research front and on the learning design and impact and various related areas.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Hemant, for your time. Thanks very much.
Thank you very
for
much.
this.
Thank you, Guru. Thanks everyone
Thanks all
who
of
has
you.
joined us on time.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.